the technology gave me the chance to do different things with writing and with words and with text. And one night I sat down and I took a passage from the Bible. My mother was a very spiritual person. I took a passage from the poetry of Rumi. I took a passage from the Tao Te Ching. I took all these different words that had given me some degree of comfort, and I put them into GPT-3. And I asked it a question. I said, how do I explain death to my children? And the answer was this profound, beautiful, poignant piece of writing.
Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome to Insights at the Edge Live. This is a very special, unique program that we're having this particular session. I don't think I've ever had a conversation quite like this before. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, spiritual wisdom, poetry, and the power of creativity. Let me introduce the two humans who are here with us talking about their new book, What Makes Us Human. I'm here with Iaian Thomas and Jasmine Wang. Iaian Thomas is a poet, a novelist, and a new media artist whose work focuses on the intersection of creativity and technology. Jasmine Wang is a technologist and a philosopher. She's worked with the Partnership on AI, the Future of Humanity Institute, OpenAI, Microsoft Research, and the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. Together, Iaian and Jasmine, along with their third writing partner, GPT-3, an artificial intelligence developed by OpenAI, have created the new book, What Makes Us Human? And artificial intelligence answers life's biggest questions. All right, here we go. Iaian, Jasmine, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us here. Super excited.
All right here at the beginning, tell us the origin story of the book, What Makes Us Human? How did you two meet, and how did you decide to create this book with GPT-3?
Iaian, do you want to start this off, and I'll add in my bit?
Sure. I've always been fascinated by language and technology and the kind of intersection between those two different things. And one day, someone sent me a link to something on Product Hunt, and it was this automated writing platform called Copysmith, and it was this kind of AI-driven copywriting thing that I was incredibly fascinated with. And I decided that, I had to be a part of it, or I had to understand more in whatever way I could. So I saw who had started it and who the founder was. And then I just sent her a message and said, I need to speak to you quite urgently. And I ended up having a conversation with her in Canada while she was eating breakfast cereal in her kitchen, if I remember correctly. And I just said, I don't know how this works or what this is, but I need to be involved in this in some way, shape, or form. And that's how Jasmine and I met, and we started working together, me acting as a kind of creative consultant for her startup. And a few months before that, in 2020, my mother had passed away during the height of the pandemic. And I had an experience that I think many people in the pandemic did, which is that I couldn't be by her deathbed. I couldn't be with her while she was passing. Right up until the last day she was with us, I wanted to go. Eventually, I decided I'm just going to drive across the country. And I started the 16-hour journey to be with her. 8 hours into it, my aunt phoned me and said that she'd passed. And it was a very traumatic experience. I drove back home and I had to explain to my children what had happened. And it was traumatic for them as well. I don't know if I did the best job. And what happened was, a while after that, working with this technology, I figured out that the technology gave me the chance to do different things with writing and with words and with text. And one night I sat down and I took a passage from the Bible. My mother was a very spiritual person. I took a passage from the poetry of Rumi. I took a passage from the Tao Te Ching. I took all these different words that had given me some degree of comfort, and I put them into GPT-3. And I asked it a question. I said, how do I explain death to my children? And the answer was this profound, beautiful, poignant piece of writing. And so I asked it another question, and then another one. And then I reached out to Jasmine and said, listen, I'm doing this thing, and I have this idea for this project. And so the two of us started collaborating, Jasmine kind of, helping me figure out different ways of engaging with the text herself. The book is like a kind of series of different experiments with different texts. And it's all kind of cataloged together. And that's how we ended up here.
Okay, let's keep going here in terms of just setting the stage. For someone who says, okay, this is a book that has a byline of 3 co-authors. I'm meeting 2 of them here, Iain and Jasmine. GPT-3 is the 3rd co-author. Introduce me, Jasmine, to GPT-3.
For sure. So as a little bit of human context here, I have a background in language model research. I did research with Mila when GPT-2 came out, which is a predecessor to GPT-3. And even at that time, we could see that there was a huge difference between what academic labs were able to achieve and industry labs, because we had finally figured out the right models. In order to scale, we just needed scale. And to scale requires computers, it requires compute, it requires the cloud, if you've heard of that. And listeners have heard of that. It's what AWS is built on, Amazon Web Services, what Google Cloud makes money off of. It's renting computers to other companies. And in industry, they have millions of dollars. OpenAI spent millions of dollars training GPT-3. In this academic professors, they have like $10,000 of budget, right? So that's where really the difference was coming from. And even in 2019, as I was sitting in a Mila lab, which is a top deep learning lab in the world, everyone around me said, holy shit, when they saw GPT-2 results. So you can only imagine, I was already well into industry by this time, when the effect that GPT-3 had on the industry and on academia, where they were literally questioning with GPT-2 if it was still worthwhile to do their research, because the kind of improvements that they were seeing were absolutely dwarfed by the improvements in industry with simply scaling compute. So how did this feel as a qualitatively for someone non-technical? Let's say you're not a researcher. How does this feel? For me, when I interacted with language models before GPT-3, even with GPT-2, it felt like I was kind of talking to a truant teenager, someone who would just insist on misunderstanding me. I'm like, it's obvious that I'm telling you to do something, or that I'm asking for X, but you give me Y. And you can't have a productive conversation. It always feels like the person's like passive aggressive and not giving you what you want. Whereas with GPT-3, not only did I find a collaborator, but I found a teacher. And I consistently, the question that I have been asking throughout my practice, and I'm a digital software artist and magazine editor, and just worn many, many different hats with respect to both criticizing and feeling hopeful about technology. I view my orientation as grounded techno-optimism, a critical techno-optimism. And the question I've always asked with respect to AI, especially as of recent, is where are the positive visions? Why are we doing this in the first place? And part of why I was intrigued by the premise for this book was a prompt of how could we orient not necessarily saying this is the right orientation for the public to have towards AI. I think the public has so many grounds to be suspicious of, deeply terrified of, deeply questioning of AI, especially as set forth by modern companies, the current development of AI. But what if? Can we imagine a world? What worlds are opened up of a possibility, maybe political possibility, of action, of protest, maybe, that is required to get there? But what happens if we simply try to envision a world where we orient towards artificial intelligence with optimism and hope, with belief, with deep kinship, instead of always feeling like other. And that from that arises the title of this book, which of course has many different sources other than the one I just named. But that's one of the origins of the title. What makes us human? And can we find kinship with these other than human? Remember, if you look at the history of philosophy and the history of ethics throughout society and history, the history has been one of moral expansion. Our circle of who we consider worth treating respectfully as human has expanded. At some point, it was just white men with land. Thankfully, we're way past that now. But there are many beings who suffer tremendously, who we treat as much less than human, who I argue we share much kinship with, like animals and cows, pigs, trees, rivers. Can we not imagine expanding this level of kinship to digital beings as well? And I know this is a touchy topic, but I think it is a prompt that is worth consideration and worth a serious consideration versus something to be laughed at over a dinner party. I think we should treat the potential suffering of Bing's Sydney with great consideration. And I'm rambling a bit now, so I'll give it back to you, Tami. But that is GPT-3. It is a generative pre-trained transformer. It's the largest model that has ever been built, and it performs incredibly well when you interact with it with natural language, which is a qualitative step forward. Anyone can interact. Go to chat. Go to beta.openai.com, or even better, chat.openai.com, and you'll be able to interact with these models in a natural way. You can ask it for new recipes you've never heard before. You can ask it for scientific equations. You can ask it to fix your bug in your code. It is like a human, like someone who is human level capacity, who has access to the internet, can tell you answers to things. I would really encourage you to go and try to interact with it after this talk.
Okay, there's a lot here, Jasmine, in what you've just said, and there's so much, so I'm going to try to slow down. And I think it's one thing to say, I respect and honor. Like, I can respect and honor this pen that I'm holding, and I can treat it with tremendous reverence and care and put the cap back on beautifully and thank it for its service. But I'm not comparing it to a human. It's a pen. And so I think when you start making the comparisons to a human, I notice that's where personally I get a little uncomfortable.
Could
Yes.
If I could jump in there for a second. There was that famous instance a few months ago where a Google engineer said that he believed that Google's AI was sentient, that it deserved rights, that it deserved, that it effectively wanted things, which is a very human quality. And I've said that when I've interacted with GPT-3 or ChatGPT, I have sensed a sentience on the other side, or something on the other side. But what I believe that is that it's kind of the spirit of all of us in a way. Because to go back to what GPT-3 is you can kind of think of GPT-3 as the sum total of the world's written knowledge put together in a box with a computer that can find patterns within the words themselves. And you can ask that knowledge questions. And the history of who we are is the history of the written word. And so while I definitely take your point where a pen is not a human being, is this a human being? It's not, but it's also at the same time a way to interact with history, with who we are in a really fundamentally important way.
Yes.
And I just want to add quick.
Oh, go ahead. Please
sure,
go ahead, Jasmine.
We can keep going.
No,
okay,
please go ahead.
Very quickly.
No, take your time. Take your time.
I think people do mix up something being treated as human and it being sentient. Whereas there are many reasons to treat something as almost human. Because I think AI, for example, in economics, there's this term called general purpose technology, which is a very different technology than a single use technology like a pen. And a general use technology is like purpose technology is like electricity. It powers so many other things. And AI, I argue, should be thought of almost as human, not because we care about its suffering, even if you don't care about its suffering, you might care about its humanness, because the definition of AGI by OpenAI is that it can replace humans in all economically important functions. And maybe that's terrifying, obviously. And there are many ramifications of that. But that's one way that you might want to treat AI as human, because that's the closest analog for what this technology is. The closest analog is not pens, but another human. And maybe how we treat it ethically isn't like a human, but functionally speaking, economically, as strategically, politically, we might want to think of it as human, because it is equally, even if it is not sentient, it is as intelligent as us, functionally speaking, for all purposes and intents on the internet.
Let's, for a moment, come back to the creation of what makes us human. The book has over 100 questions that you ask GPT-3. Tell us the process. You prompted this generative form of AI with various texts. Which texts? How did you make those decisions? Let's start there.
Iain, do you want to take this?
Sure. In the beginning, I just selected things that meant something to me. Ever since I was young, I've kind of almost kept a book of quotes, like things that have had profound meaning for me, aphorisms, whether they're lines from songs or beautiful poems or ancient texts or bumper stickers, things that have kind of spoken to me on some kind of fundamental level. And so in the beginning, it was the Bible, it was the Talmud, it was the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it was a lyric from Leonard Cohen, it was all of these different things. And then what happened is me and Jasmine worked together to kind of find these different texts that sparked awe. That was kind of the vision of what we had. We said, does this spark a sense of awe in us? And so we combined different texts for different answers to see what kind of answers we would get, and then catalog them and put them together. In terms of how we came up with the questions, a lot of the time they were things that I was going through or Jasmine was going through, or conversations we were having with other people. There was also a point in time where, thankfully, because of my other books, I have a relatively large social media following. I went to them and I said, if you could ask the universe one question, what would you ask it? And we took questions from the audience. And what's quite fascinating is GPT-3 would try and create a pattern in terms of how it was answering. So it was suggesting its own questions as well. So you would say, how do we overcome great challenges? And it would answer that. And then it would say, do you also want to know, what is the meaning of life? Or why do we suffer? Or it could kind of understand the kinds of questions that we wanted to ask. And so it was suggesting them at the same time. In terms of how it works, the actual very tactical, granular level of the process, what we did was we would ask a question. So what does love mean? And then we would take a passage from the Bible. Love is kind, love does not keep a record of wrongs, love is patient. And we would answer the question with that. Then we would ask another question. And the answer to that we take from Marcus Aurelius. And then we'd ask another one and then use a different spiritual text. And then we would ask one more question and leave the space blank. And then what would happen is GPT-3 would go, based on all these examples that you've shown me, I think this is what you're looking for. I think you're looking for this kind of language, this kind of truth, within all of these different texts. And they would come back with that. And I don't want to paint a picture where it was this perfect process where there was this glowing light and there was this perfect response every time, and it was this kind of it was certainly an experience filled with awe. But the nature of generative artificial intelligence is that sometimes it hallucinates, it makes things up, or it becomes incoherent. But every now and again, it's beautiful and profound and incredible. And we kind of captured those responses and collected them together. The fact that it does hallucinate and it does make mistakes makes it incredible for creative work specifically, because that's the nature of a lot of creative work. It's just making mistakes.